So this morning I'm going to give you highlights of the French Revolution. I can't give you all the details because it's too vast and complex, but I'm going to show you some basic movements. And I want you to notice three things as we see this material. First of all, consider as we're going along the effects of the lust for power. And the second thing to consider is the rejection of Christianity for a state religion. Notice how that goes along through this. And look at the parallels in our own country as we're going along here. And consider the resilience of the church. And in the questions you'll see afterwards, you could sort of see the connections, I think, between what's going on in the French Revolution and what goes on in the United States of America today. So we begin here. From revolution to republic, this is where France wants to go. This is a picture of the storming of La Bastille, which where they get the name Bastille Day in the celebration of and the honoring of the events of their revolution. It's kind of like their version of 4th of July. Some of the things that fuel the revolution. By 1789, after centuries of political and social unrest, things have been fermenting. Of course, I'm thinking about French wine as I'm doing this. Vive la France. Okay? So you have a fine blend of religious wars. You have state and natural power struggling. You have social and economic inequality. Does that sound like today? Huh? You have intellectual enlightenment, marvelously so in many ways, advance in the sciences. All this is blending into a fine vintage that challenges the authority structure of the time, okay? Namely the monarchy. France's world prominence at the time is very, very high. France is a cultural and intellectual leader in the European community. And so French unrest has a wide effect, a lot of ripples. French philosophical movements of agnosticism, secularism, rationalism, these are starting to move beyond mere social and political upheaval, but they're spreading into tendencies right into the heart of the church. The death of King Louis XIV becomes a pivotal event here. He ruled from 1643 to 1715. He believed in the divine origin of the monarchy. He won the support of French aristocracy and would be considered one of the most powerful French monarchs until the French Revolution. He saw the height and the fall of what is called the old regime, which would include him, the monarchy, and the feudal states. The old regime had three basic classes. You had the clergy, intellectual group, noted leaders immediately. You had nobility, King Louis XIV, and you had the commoners, everybody else. These are the three estate classes of the old regime. By 1789, the Church of France retained most of the French church retained most of the real estate of the kingdom. 1/5 total available lands were owned by the church. Wealthy clergy often served as regents to the king. Oh boy, those were the days. For the preservation of their prestige, they often biased their loyalties to the state over the church, which compromises the strength of the papacy. A second class of clergy, however, praise you Jesus, exists, that was mostly parish priests living among the poor and living relatively simple lives, people like the Curé d'Ars at the time, eating moldy potatoes every day for his food. That's true. The second estate is your aristocracy, 400,000 nobles, the wealthiest of the country. And after the death of Louis XIV, they elevate their power and begin returning to the feudal system. Of course, they exempt themselves from taxes. Okay? Not a problem, right? Okay, you'll see. The third estate represents 97% of the population. Oh, by the way, the clergy don't pay taxes either. Okay? So 97% of the population is the rest, the commoners. And they have two tiers. There's the bourgeoisie, which are kind of a middle class from our perspective. They're wealthy, but they're not of noble blood. They're bankers, they're merchants, they're lawyers, and they don't have any rank of nobility, but they do have some prominence and power, a type of our middle class. Of course, they exempt themselves from taxes. All right? And then you have the second tier of the third estate, which is the poor, the urban workers, the peasants, the poorest of the poor. Of course, they're not tax exempt. That's right, nothing's changed. But you see now, you see right there, you see the economic problem brewing, huh? Okay, 97% of the, or not even 90%, 97%, the poor are paying the taxes with nothing, and the rich are milking the state. Okay, so the poor carry the tax burden. So you have a financial crisis. This opens the door for a mass political turmoil. So it's the consequence of gross mismanagement. Louis XIV, extremely opulent and spending lots of money on war and acquiring territory. By 1739, France bled 36% of their annual income to pay debt from Louis XIV's war. By 1763, the debt hits 62% of the annual income of the country. Sounds like I'm United States management. After supporting the American Revolution, well, at least they did something right. After supporting the American Revolution, the debt climbed to 100% of their entire national income. Imagine that. Let's not throw out any names, please. Okay. Here's the Palace of Versailles that Louis XIV built. Isn't this fantastic? Notice how many poor people are there. Okay, so there's a rude awakening by a defoliated money tree, if I may use the image. Louis XV and Louis XVI make an attempt at tax reform. However, the nobility oppose the reforms. And the nobility placed pressure on Louis XVI to call a general assembly of the three estates. The nobles desire to force concessions on their own behalf to ensure their political and economic power over the king, because he's starting to have a heart for the poor, God forbid. So the revolution becomes conceived here. This guy named Abbe, I can't pronounce his name, even though I'm French. Okay, he's the author of a document called "What is the Third Estate?" Remember, the third estate is the bourgeois and the poor. Okay, And so he makes a case that the third estate is a truer representation of the people of France than the other two estates, which is fair. So the document brought support for the abolition of the first and the second estate. And so now a political movement starts here. So there's a general estate called, at Versailles, the third estate proclaims itself as what it becomes known as the National Assembly. So they see their prominence there. The second estate, that is the nobility, pressured Louis XVI to suppress the National Assembly. Louis XVI locked out the National Assembly from the meetings, giving into the pressure of the nobility. The National Assembly continued to meet in defiance. And of course, that's 97% of the people. Fearing a revolt, Louis XVI called 20,000 troops into Versailles and Paris. Riots and revolution is born. In 1789, July 12th, food riots break out in Paris. Gun-shy troops withdraw. They don't want to fire on their own people. Looting begins. July 14th, the mob attacks the Bastille, which is pictured here. Bastille Day, then, we know now as the birth of the French Revolution, as the common people overthrow the French monarchy. And there is the flag of the revolution. King and nobility concede. The army is disbanded at Paris. The first and second estates join the National Assembly. The bourgeois class call for a national guard who adopt the tricolored flag that you see here as the symbol of the revolution. Now here's an interesting point fueling, okay? Remember, the bourgeois class are middle class. Because they haven't been nobility, they really didn't share a lot of the prominence and power, but now the third estate is the class of the poor in which they're included. Guess who's grabbing the power now? And they have the wealth to do it. Okay? The National Assembly Act is born on August 4th, 1789. They meet the demands of the peasants. The riots are quelled and peace is promoted. The night of August 4th, the National Assembly meets with liberal nobles and declares the end of feudalism. Here pictured is the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens, declared by the National Assembly on August 26, 1789. Now, you'll notice some of this stuff, okay? Think of some of the similarities with our own Declaration of Independence. A few, anyways. All men are born equal and have the rights to liberty, property, security, and resistance. Law is understood as the expression of the general will of the people. Now that's interesting, okay? So what you already see something that you're a common law, but at the will of the people. So you've already taken a political and a philosophical leap here from a law that's based on principles like the Ten Commandments and principles of truth, principles of justice, for the will of the people. In other words, what majority thinks is proper. Given the amount of sin in the world, that majority makes me a little suspicious. Okay? Public officials and armed forces are subject to the authority of the nation founded on the will of the people. The Declaration's effect on religious freedom. Religious tolerance of religious beliefs is accepted as long as they do not disturb the public order established by the law. Okay, notice the slippery slope that this is going into now. Okay? So the public order is going to determine what's tolerance, and you're opening the door now to what's proper for religion. Okay? Religious tolerance would soon open the door to a resistance of the church's freedom and open the door to persecution. The declaration was the coup de grace to the old regime. That was the end of the three estates, where you have the National Assembly. The National Assembly establishes a single chamber, and the king is forced into Paris, where the National Assembly will now meet together with the king and become known as the Legislative Assembly. So they pull the king out of Versailles, and they force him to be involved in this, bringing in the nobility, and basically placing the nobility under the will of the people. Interesting. Now you have the great church grab, I call it. Church land, wealth, monasteries, convents, they're all confiscated and redistributed among the people in an effort to solve the debt crisis. But you understand, though, who's a little bit more powerful right now? Bourgeoisie. Are the poor going to get this? No. Bourgeoisie class will get this. This most benefited the bourgeoisies who dominate the legislative assembly. The civil constitution of the clergy is initiated. In July of 1790, the Legislative Assembly passes the civil constitution of the clergy to do the following: secularize the church. So now you have the government beginning to regulate the church. They govern the Church of France. They separate the church administration from the papacy. Priests are chosen by local assemblies. Citizens get to choose the hierarchy. And there's a government salary structure for the clergy. Well, given the way the government pays, that might not be a bad deal for me. Diplomatic ties with the Holy See are literally severed. You see what's going on, okay? So now you have some divisions in the church brewing. Some clerics submit to the civil constitution, not because they really want to, but there is a lot of pressure, and you can understand that. Others start to form an underground church. Yes, praise you, Jesus. So now you have a reaction by Rome. In 1791, Pius VI condemns the civil constitution. Pius is named now as an enemy of the state. Some regions of France reject the civil constitution. Vendée, Normandy, and Brittany are most notable. There's a movie out called War of the Vendees, if you want to see it. It's a nice picture of what's going on at the time. It's good to be king, huh? In December 1792, the National Convention finds Louis XVI guilty of treason for being against the revolution. Of course, he sees his own wealth rising, but he also sees what's going on with the church, and he doesn't like it. On January 16th, 1793, he's guillotined. Vive la Révolution. The problem of the old regime remains, and the lower class continue to be frustrated with the revolution. So in spite of all their efforts to bolster the common people, it's really the same old thing. The people with money are gaining more power again, and the poor people are being more repressed. Nothing is really changed. All this land that was grabbed by the church for redistribution has only filled somebody's coffers and not distributed to the poor. Take all the taxes and keep the poor placated, but really what's going on is corruption. The National Convention takes a more violent measure against all suspected counter-revolutionary factions. There's more mass executions, and this becomes known as the Reign of Terror. Notice the guillotine here, nice picture. The Reign of Terror A committee of public safety is formed to suppress all parties against the revolution. This guy, his name is Robespierre. Maximilien Robespierre. He's the chief enforcer of the Committee for Public Safety. He had no compunction about using any means, just or unjust, for the sake of the revolution and dealing with anybody who questioned the revolution. However, he did maintain to promote civic virtue and a good society for good citizens. Isn't that nice? So the reign of terror eventually strikes the church. The Committee for Public Safety considered all religion as counter-revolutionary. So a campaign of de-Christianization begins. November 1793, the churches were closed. Priests were arrested. Praise you, Jesus. Persecution for the sake of the name. Priests refusing to take an oath for the revolution, guillotined. Many religious as well. Women and children were killed to stop Christianity for the future generations. Imagine that. Women and children. I think ISIS took a few lessons from this. State deistic religious cults are instituted. The Cathedral of Notre Dame, Paris, was dedicated to the goddess of reason. That's ironic, isn't it? The calendar is changed to eliminate Christian feasts and seasons. The 10-day week is instituted to suppress the Sabbath day. And saints' feast days are replaced with pagan celebrations. And again, now, state deistic religious cults. So all this is, there's a new religion being created, okay? Robespierre overreaches a little bit. The National Assembly Convention begins to weary Robespierre of Robespierre's extreme zeal for cruelty. Robespierre pushes legislation for allowing his committee to convict his own political opponents in the convention. Now, remember, Robespierre is of the bourgeois class. July 1794, the National Convention executes Robespierre and his colleagues. The Directory. The Directory is an assembly made of the bourgeoisie class who have profited from the chaos of the revolution. They maintained the suppression of the church, hoping it would finally die out. The monarchist sympathizers were elected to the legislature, and the Directory had lost all power. Fructidor, a successful young general named Napoleon, a supporter of the Directory, he sent his general to organize a coup d'etat. Fructidor coup d'etat, September 4th, 1797. This is a major milestone for the revolution. It nullifies the election of the monarchists and their constitution. Okay? So the monarchists are trying to grab the power back, and the revolution is taking it away again. The restored bourgeois leadership takes place, and this is now the death blow to a free democratic republic. Napoleon Bonaparte, we meet him now. He's born in Corsica, 1769. His family, minor nobility. After 1789, he rises through the ranks of the army during the Revolution. He's a brigadier general during the Reign of Terror. He's noted for crossing the Alps via the Great St. Bernard Pass, which is pictured here, where he moves in to conquer northern Italy. He excels in government in any place he conquers, so he's making a name for himself. Now Napoleon meets Pius VI. As most of Italy capitulates to Napoleon's army, he starts to attach the Papal States. He forces Pius VI to surrender his lands. On August 29, 1799, Pius VI dies. However, before he dies, he sets himself up with a few cardinals and plans the election of a new pope, which Napoleon doesn't realize is happening. The revolution sees his death, however, as the last of the popes and the death of these superstitious Catholic beliefs. From success in Italy to First Council in Paris is where Napoleon rises. Napoleon was the likely choice for the First Council because of his reputation in governance, where he conquers, and his savvy war abilities. He stabilizes the country and ends the revolution. He founded the French Empire that fused the idealism of the revolution with the control of the monarchy. Napoleon assists the church now to rise from the ashes. He restores religious freedom. He understands the importance of the Catholic faith for the French people, and so he wants to use this support for the church really to back his own empire. Okay, so now he's moving into a relationship of utility with the church. And if you have this relationship of utility with the church, as soon as the church becomes unuseful to him, well, he takes a different direction, which we'll see. He sought to restore relations with the Pope. He reopened the churches and allowed priests into public ministry again. He restored the 7-day week and the Sabbath day of rest. Pius VII now makes his entrance. He's elected March 14th, 1800. He enters Rome July 3rd, 1800. He had a vision of Christian revival and a restored church in France and all of Europe. Praise you, Jesus. He did not condemn the principles of democracy, but he did condemn the unjust means of some revolutionaries. That's a nice middle road, okay? No revolution or democracy, liberty, and equality without Christ is what he would say. He resisted the ideas and laws that violated church freedom. Pius VII and Napoleon come to terms here. Napoleon's Secretary of State, Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, he's a former bishop. They meet the cardinal who Pius has appointed to form an agreement between France and the papacy. On August 15th, 1801, all the parties agree. The agreement is short-lived. It's a short-lived joy for Catholics, because after the Concordat, a series of legislative restrictions are passed in the interest of public safety. This is called the Organic Articles. It's installed to appease anti-Catholic parties, mostly bourgeoisie, who are seeing that the poor might gain some prominence over their own interests. They outlawed publication then of papal documents and council decrees and synods taking place without government approval, which is also now having effect in Rome as well because Napoleon has conquered Italy. There's limited episcopal administration, suppressed religious orders, and they promoted civil marriage over religious marriages. Okay? So meet your emperor. By 1804, Napoleon names himself emperor. Notice that. He names himself emperor. But he's very powerful. You can almost see Hitler learning some of his lessons here. Okay, though appearing the preeminent revolutionary, he made for himself a court with the lavish opulence of pomp and nobility. Seeing himself as a neo-Charlemagne, he requested Pius VII to crown him at Notre Dame in Paris. Pius agrees to this, hoping that it'll forge a concordant with and inspire Napoleon to rescind some of the restrictions of the organic articles. Here's a famous picture of the self-anointed emperor. The Pope is seated, and that's Napoleon holding the crown. Because Napoleon took the crown from the hands of Pope Pius VII, and he crowned himself. It was an act to demonstrate that his power did not come from the Pope, but from himself. The emperor defies the chair of Peter. Wherever he conquered, Napoleon set up a code called the Napoleonic Code of Laws, and it became the new law of the land. The Napoleonic Code included this: equity among religious denominations and freedom of religious practices, civil marriage, civil divorce. You see, interesting, huh? The state getting involved in the sacramental life of the church. Okay. Severe regulations on the church. Now Napoleon wants a divorce from Pius VII, a pun intended here. Okay. In 1805, Napoleon petitions Rome for the annulment of his brother's marriage to enable a new marriage to take place for political power. Pius VII, of course, refuses the divorce and refuses to join Rome to Napoleon's continental system. Napoleon forces his hand. He threatens to abolish priestly celibacy in Europe. Sorry. He suppresses religious orders. He appointed a French patriarch over papal authority in France. So now he's setting up a state Catholic church. You have something similar going on in other countries, namely in China. He orders troops to march on Rome. By 1801, he has seized much of the papal state property. He's suppressed papal authority. He transfers papal states to French rule. Papal authority is restricted to the papal palaces. So in other words, the Pope, in a sense, is under house arrest. Pius VII, he has fortitude. Excommunicates Napoleon. Napoleon arrests Pius and imprisons him in Savona, France. The Concordance of Fontainebleau. While Pius is imprisoned, he continues to issue papal bulls rejecting Napoleon's policy. So his cardinals are meeting with them, and they're staying connected. By 1811, Napoleon convenes a national council of French bishops to take authority over ecclesial affairs. The Council of Bishops, however, remains faithful to the Pope. Under pressure, Pius agrees to a discussion of Napoleon's authority for making ecclesiastical appointments. Napoleon publishes the discussion between he and Pius in 1813 under the title of the Concordance of Fontainebleau. Pius VII returns a salvo. Pius is encouraged by his cardinals to reject the Concordant, which Napoleon has pushed through, and because he's pushed it through, he has skewed the Concordant, and it really doesn't do anything for Pius, so he rejects it. Napoleon's star now begins to fall. In 1812, of course, the invasion of Russia fails. Austria, Prussia, Russia, and England all march to Paris and force Napoleon's abdication. In 1814, Pius returns to Rome with cheers from the people. Pius VII uses his influence, however, to protect Napoleon's family from any retribution. So now someone is going to catch Napoleon in his free fall. While imprisoned on the island of St. Helena, Napoleon sought ministry from a Catholic priest. Word of this gets to Pius VII, and when he learns of it, he intercedes on Napoleon's behalf and extends him much charity. Napoleon would later call Pius VII the old man full of tolerance and light. Dead and risen, Napoleon is restored to full communion with the Church by Pius VII, and he finally dies on May 5th, 1821. That's a little bit, that's a typo. We'll have Jenny look at that. And remember, where is the Church now, and where is Napoleon? And remember that the gates of hell will not prevail against the Church. Jesus said that himself, and that's a promise we can stand on. Amen.
Agnus Dei